What happens when a beloved morning television host decides to challenge one of the world's most controversial royals on live television? You won't believe what unfolds when Prince Harry sits down with Lorraine Kelly, expecting a friendly chat, only to find himself facing the most brutal interrogation of his media career. This isn't just another celebrity interview gone wrong. This is a complete meltdown that had viewers across the nation glued to their screens in absolute shock. Before we get into this incredible story, make sure you hit that subscribe button and drop a comment below, because you're not going to believe what unfolds when these two go head-to-head in what started as a simple morning show appearance but quickly descended into television chaos. The atmosphere in the ITV studios was electric. As Prince Harry made his way onto the familiar Lorraine set, his trademark nervous smile already showing signs of strain. What should have been a straightforward promotional appearance for his latest charitable venture was about to become a masterclass in how quickly live television can spiral completely out of control. Lorraine Kelly, known for her warm Scottish charm and typically gentle approach with guests, had clearly come prepared for battle, and Harry was walking straight into her trap. "Prince Harry, lovely to have you back on the show," Lorraine began, her voice carrying an edge that regular viewers immediately picked up on. The camera captured Harry's subtle shift in his chair, his media-trained instincts already sensing something was off about the host's demeanor. "Now, I have to say, there's been quite a lot of chatter about your recent comments regarding the Commonwealth countries and their relationship with the monarchy. Some might say you've been rather selective with your criticism." Harry's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his practiced smile remained firmly in place. "Well, Lorraine, I think it's important to have honest conversations about difficult topics. That's what progress looks like." His voice carried that familiar defensive undertone that had become his signature in recent interviews, the one that immediately put viewers on edge because they knew it meant controversy was brewing. "Honest conversations?" "Yes," Lorraine nodded, leaning forward slightly in her chair. "But some people are wondering why these honest conversations seem to only flow in one direction. You've been quite vocal about the institution's failings, but remarkably quiet about your own role in some rather questionable decisions. The Oprah interview, for instance. Some of those claims have been, well, let's call them disputed." The temperature in the studio seemed to drop several degrees. Harry's smile faltered for just a moment before he recovered, but the cameras caught it all. "I think what Meghan and I shared was our truth, Lorraine, and I stand by every word of it." His voice had taken on that clipped, aristocratic tone that he typically tried to suppress, a clear sign that his composure was beginning to crack. "Your truth," Lorraine repeated, her Scottish accent becoming more pronounced as her voice sharpened. "That's an interesting phrase, isn't it? Because surely there's just truth, facts. Either something happened or it didn't. Either someone said something or they didn't." She paused, letting the words hang in the air like a challenge. "The problem is, when your truth conflicts with everyone else's recollection of events, it starts to look less like honesty and more like—" "More like what?" Harry interrupted, his carefully maintained media persona beginning to slip away entirely. The practiced warmth in his eyes was being replaced by something much colder, much more volatile. "Please, Lorraine, finish that thought. I'm fascinated to hear what you really think." Lorraine didn't back down. If anything, she seemed energized by his challenge. More like a very public temper tantrum from someone who didn't get their way. "You left the royal family because you wanted privacy, yet you've done nothing but court publicity ever since. You complained about media intrusion, while simultaneously signing multi-million-dollar deals with Netflix and Spotify. You criticized your family for their handling of mental health issues, while publicly airing their private conversations on international television." The studio audience was dead silent. Camera operators were frantically adjusting their shots to capture every micro-expression on Harry's face as Lorraine's words hit their mark. His hands, previously relaxed in his lap, had begun to clench into fists. The transformation was remarkable. The carefully constructed public image of the reformed royal was cracking before everyone's eyes. "You have absolutely no idea what you're talking about," Harry said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper that somehow managed to be more intimidating than if he had shouted. You sit here in your comfortable studio, passing judgment on decisions you could never understand, on a life you've never lived, on pressures you've never faced. Oh, but I do understand pressure, Harry. Lorraine shot back, her own voice rising slightly. I understand the pressure of being scrutinized by the public. The difference is, I don't blame everyone else when things don't go my way. I don't throw my colleagues under the bus the moment it becomes convenient. The accusation hung in the air like smoke. Harry's face had gone pale, except for two bright spots of color high on his cheekbones, a sure sign that his legendary temper was about to make an appearance. Colleagues? He repeated, his voice dripping with disdain. Is that what you think my family are? Colleagues? Well, what would you call them? Lorraine pressed, clearly sensing she had found a nerve. Because, from where I'm sitting, it looks like you treated them exactly like colleagues. Useful when they served your purposes, disposable when they didn't. The Queen, your grandmother, who gave you everything, who stood by you through scandal after scandal. And how did you repay her? By blindsiding her with announcements on Instagram and then publicly questioning her judgment on international television. That did it. Harry's carefully constructed composure shattered completely. Don't you dare, he snarled, leaning forward in his chair with such intensity that security personnel could be seen shifting nervously in the background. Don't you dare use my grandmother to score cheap points for your little morning show. She understood my position better than any of you ever will. Did she, though? Lorraine asked, her voice now carrying a note of genuine curiosity that was somehow more cutting than outright hostility. Because the reports I heard suggested she was deeply hurt by the way you handled your departure, deeply disappointed in the accusations you made about the family she devoted her entire life to protecting. The camera zoomed in on Harry's face, capturing the moment when his media training finally abandoned him entirely. His eyes blazed with a fury that viewers hadn't seen since his notorious confrontations with photographers in his younger days. You know nothing about what she thought or felt, he said through gritted teeth. Nothing. But Lorraine wasn't finished. She had clearly done her homework, and she was about to deploy her most devastating weapon. Let's talk about the Invictus Games, she said, her voice taking on an almost conversational tone that was somehow more menacing than her previous attacks. The sudden shift in topic caught Harry completely off guard. His anger flickered with confusion for just a moment. Your pet project, your pride and joy, the one thing everyone agrees you got right. Except, well, there are some interesting questions about the finances, aren't there? Harry's face went from flushed with anger to deadly pale in seconds. What are you talking about? He demanded. But there was something new in his voice now, genuine fear. Oh, I think you know exactly what I'm talking about, Lorraine replied, shuffling through some papers on her desk with theatrical precision. The mysteriously inflated expenses, the curious lack of transparency in the charity's financial reporting, the questions that certain investigative journalists have been asking but somehow never seem to get answered. It's funny how someone who demands such transparency from his own family becomes remarkably secretive when it comes to his own organization's books. The accusation hit Harry like a physical blow. He shot up from his chair so quickly that it rolled backward several feet, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent studio. How dare you? He hissed, his voice shaking with rage. How dare you attack something that helps wounded veterans? You're disgusting. I'm not attacking the veterans, Harry, Lorraine said, her voice maddeningly calm in contrast to his explosion. I'm questioning why someone who claims to care so much about them would potentially be profiting from their suffering. Because that's what this is really about, isn't it? Everything you do has to benefit you somehow. The interviews, the book deals, the Netflix series. Even your charity work seems designed more to rehabilitate your image than actually help people. You have no proof of anything, Harry snarled. But his denial sounded hollow even to his own ears. The cameras caught every micro-expression, every telltale sign of guilt flickering across his features. You're just throwing around baseless accusations because you know it makes good television. Baseless? Lorraine raised an eyebrow, her Scottish accent becoming more pronounced as she pressed her advantage. Is that what you call the documented discrepancies in your organization's spending reports? The luxury accommodations charged to the charity's expense account? The suspiciously high administrative costs that seem to coincide with your personal travel schedule? The studio audience was utterly transfixed. This wasn't just a celebrity interview gone wrong anymore. This was character assassination in real time. And everyone could sense that Lorraine had information that could potentially destroy Harry's reputation entirely. The prince himself seemed to realize this too, his face cycling through expressions of rage, panic, and desperate calculation. "You're lying," Harry said, but his voice cracked on the words. "This is a hit job. Someone's fed you false information to try and destroy me." "False information?" Lorraine leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying watching him squirm. "Like the false information about your family being racist? Like the false information about being cut off financially when we all know your father was still supporting you months after you left? Like the false information about not knowing what you were getting into when you married into the royal family despite having access to the best advisors in the world?" Each accusation was like a hammer blow, and Harry was visibly struggling to maintain any semblance of composure. His hands were shaking now. Whether from rage or fear, it was impossible to tell. "Stop," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Just stop." But Lorraine was relentless. "You see, Harry, this is what I find fascinating about you. You present yourself as this wounded victim, this champion of truth and transparency, but the moment anyone turns that same scrutiny on you, you can't handle it. You dish it out, but you certainly can't take it." "I said stop!" Harry exploded, his voice echoing through the studio with such force that several audience members visibly flinched. "You don't know what you're talking about!" "Everything I've done has been to protect my family, to protect my wife, to tell the truth about what really happened." "Your truth again," Lorraine said with a bitter laugh. "Always your truth, never just the truth. Because the actual truth is that you're a spoiled brat who couldn't handle not being the center of attention anymore. When William got married and had children, when you weren't the spare anymore, but just another minor royal, you couldn't stand it. So, you found yourself an American actress who was happy to play the victim with you. And together you decided to burn down everything your grandmother spent 70 years building." The words hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Harry's face had gone completely white except for his eyes, which blazed with a fury so intense it was genuinely frightening to witness. When he spoke, his voice was so low and menacing that the studio microphones barely picked it up. "Don't you ever," he said, each word carefully enunciated, "speak about my wife like that again." "Or what?" Lorraine challenged, seemingly oblivious to the genuine danger radiating from the man standing before her. "You'll write another book about how mean I was to you? Do another interview about how the British media destroyed your life? Sue me like you've sued everyone else who's dared to question your version of events?" Harry was trembling now, his entire body vibrating with barely contained rage. "You have no idea what you've done," he said, his voice carrying a threatening undertone that had never been heard in any of his previous interviews. "No idea what you've just started." "What I've started?" Lorraine laughed, but there was something hollow about it now, as if she was finally beginning to realize she might have pushed too far. "Harry, I've simply asked you some questions. The same kinds of questions you've been asking about your family for years. If you can't handle that level of scrutiny, maybe you shouldn't have made yourself a public figure." "This isn't scrutiny," Harry said, taking a step toward Lorraine's desk in a move that immediately put security on high alert. "This is assassination. This is exactly the kind of treatment that killed my mother, and now you're trying to do the same thing to me and my family." The Diana card. He'd played it, and the effect was immediate and electric. But instead of backing down, Lorraine leaned forward, her eyes glittering with something that looked almost like triumph. "Your mother," she said softly, "would be ashamed of what you've become." The words hit the studio like a physical force. Harry's face went through a series of expressions so rapidly it was almost impossible to follow. Shock, disbelief, rage, and something that looked dangerously close to violence. The silence that followed was so complete that the sound of the studio's air conditioning seemed deafening. Then Harry laughed. It was a sound unlike anything anyone had ever heard from him before. Cold, bitter, and completely devoid of any warmth or humor. "You want to know what my mother would think?" he said, his voice now carrying a dangerous edge that made several crew members exchange worried glances. "She would think that people like you are exactly why she died. Parasites who feed off other people's pain for entertainment." Harry's voice was getting louder with each word, his aristocratic composure completely shattered. "You sit there in your little television studio thinking you're some kind of journalist, but you're nothing more than a tabloid hack who's found a way to dress up gossip as legitimate broadcasting." Lorraine's confidence finally began to waver. She had pushed countless celebrities to their breaking point over the years, but there was something genuinely unsettling about the way Harry was looking at her now. "Harry, I think you need to calm down," she said, but her voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Calm down?" Harry's laugh became even more unhinged. "You just told me my dead mother would be ashamed of me, and you want me to calm down? Do you have any idea what it's like to have your mother's memory weaponized against you by strangers who never knew her, never loved her, never held her hand while she cried about the way people like you treated her?" The studio had fallen into an uncomfortable silence that seemed to stretch on forever. Camera operators were frantically trying to capture every angle of what was clearly becoming television history, the complete and total breakdown of a member of the British royal family in real time. "Your mother was a public figure, Harry," Lorraine said, but her voice was shaking now. She understood that came with scrutiny. "Scrutiny?" Harry's voice cracked with emotion and rage. "Is that what you call hounding someone to death? Because that's what you people did. You followed her everywhere. You made up stories about her. You turned her life into a circus. And then, when she died trying to escape from photographers, you had the audacity to mourn her publicly while secretly celebrating the fact that you'd have her story to sell forever." The accusation hit like a slap. Lorraine's face went pale, but she tried to maintain her professional demeanor. "That's not fair, Harry. The media landscape was different then." "Different?" Harry was now pacing back and forth in front of Lorraine's desk, like a caged animal. "Different? How? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks exactly the same. You're still destroying people for profit. You're still taking private family matters and turning them into public entertainment. The only difference is now you pretend to care about mental health while simultaneously doing everything you can to damage people's mental health for ratings." Security personnel were now openly moving closer to the set, clearly concerned about Harry's increasingly erratic behavior. The prince seemed oblivious to their presence, completely consumed by his rage. "And the worst part," Harry continued, his voice rising to near shouting levels, "is that you do it all while pretending to be the good guys. At least the paparazzi who killed my mother were honest about what they were. Vultures feeding on carrion, but you dress it up as journalism, as holding people accountable, as some kind of public service." "Harry, please," Lorraine tried to interrupt, but he was beyond listening now. "No!" he screamed, whirling around to face her directly. "You wanted this conversation? So we're going to finish it. You want to know what my mother would think?" "She would think that you're exactly the kind of person who made her life a misery. She would think that you represent everything that's wrong with this country's media culture. She would think that you're a small, petty, vindictive woman who gets her kicks from tearing down people who are trying to make the world a better place." The words hung in the air like poison. Lorraine's face had gone completely white, and for the first time in the entire confrontation, she seemed genuinely speechless. Harry, meanwhile, was breathing heavily, his chest rising and falling rapidly, as if he'd just run a marathon. "You know what the really tragic thing is?" Harry said, his voice suddenly dropping to a whisper that was somehow more menacing than his shouting had been. "My grandmother always said that the monarchy's relationship with the media was complicated but necessary. She believed that people like you served a purpose, that you kept the institution honest, that you represented the voice of the people." He paused, letting the words sink in before delivering his final blow. "She was wrong. You don't represent anyone but yourselves. You're not journalists. You're not public servants. You're not guardians of democracy. You're entertainment parasites who have convinced yourselves that you're feeding frenzy serve some higher purpose. And the saddest part is that there are good journalists out there, real journalists, who do important work, and you've made their jobs harder by turning journalism into a blood sport. Lorraine finally found her voice. "Harry, I think we should take a break," she said weakly, but Harry was already moving. "Oh, we're taking more than a break," he said, ripping off his microphone with such force that the sound technicians winced at the feedback that screamed through the studio speakers. "We're done. Completely done. This was supposed to be about the veterans, about people who actually matter, about causes that actually make a difference. Instead, you turned it into another episode of your pathetic little gossip show." He threw the microphone down on Lorraine's desk with enough force to make her jump backward in her chair. "You want a story? Here's your story. A member of the royal family walked out of your show because you're a disgrace to journalism and a waste of airtime. Print that. Tweet that. Make that your headline." Harry turned toward the studio exit, but then stopped and looked back at Lorraine one final time. "And Lorraine? The next time you want to invoke my mother's memory to score cheap points against me, remember this moment. Remember how it felt when someone finally told you the truth about what you really are." With that, he stalked toward the studio doors, security personnel scrambling to get out of his way. The cameras followed his every step as he grabbed his coat from a production assistant and headed for the exit. "Harry, please," Lorraine called after him, but her voice was barely audible and completely lacking in authority. He didn't even slow down. At the studio doors, he turned back one final time, his face a mask of cold fury. "Enjoy your ratings boost," he said. "I hope it was worth it." The doors slammed behind him with a sound that reverberated through the silent studio like a gunshot. For several long moments, nobody moved. The cameras continued rolling, capturing Lorraine's shell-shocked expression and the stunned faces of the studio audience. Finally, Lorraine cleared her throat and looked directly into the camera. We'll be right back after this break," she said, her voice barely steady. As the show cut to commercial, the full magnitude of what had just happened began to sink in. The prince had completely lost control on live television, delivered a scathing indictment of the British media, and stormed out in the most dramatic fashion possible. It was the kind of television moment that would be replayed endlessly, analyzed by experts, and remembered for years to come. In the end, both combatants had gotten exactly what they deserved. Harry had revealed himself to be the volatile, self-pitying figure his critics always claimed he was, while Lorraine had gotten her explosive ratings moment at the cost of any pretense of journalistic integrity. It was a perfect encapsulation of everything wrong with both modern celebrity culture and media sensationalism, played out in real time for millions of viewers to witness.